Start recording. Alrighty. Thank you for coming. My name is Franco Zamora. I am the writing consultant for TAMIU ARC in the graduate program. I've been in this position for, this is my 5th year in position. I started in 2020, right after I finished my thesis with the grad school back in 2019. My background is in English and English education and writing. And when I was a master's student doing my thesis in English, there wasn't a writing consultant. So there was a lot of questions of how should we structure the thesis and dissertation, and how do you support people through that, and what should it look like? And we had some idea of what those things would be, but it's a lot more concrete now. Now 5 years later. This presentation, or this particular series of presentations, is actually part of ARC's, the Advanced Research and Curriculum's Professional Development Workshop series. Yeah, if you want to come closer, that'd be. I just have to be close enough to the microphone right here. This is part of ARC's presentation series. They're for professional development. They're open to the general public. Although we tend to have them towards graduate students or about some aspect of graduate student work. And they tend to do one every semester about thesis and dissertation. This happens to be the one. So I work for ARC, and I also work as the graduate person who looks at all the theses at the very end and the last stage. So my job is both working with the various writing problems of the students, so like discussion board posts, formatting, assignments, MLA, APA, all that stuff, and then also dissertation and thesis. So today I'm going to be, today I was mostly planning on talking about the thesis checklist and the formatting checklist, which comes at the end of thesis 2. And I'll still talk about those things, but I also, since we're a pretty small audience tonight, I'll also be able to address any questions that you have in particular. I've already discussed with you that you wanted to talk more about proposal, so we'll also look at that. It shouldn't take too long, it shouldn't be too much of an extra add-on. And then at the end, if you have any questions, or if you want to stop me in the middle and be like, I don't understand what you're saying, that's fine too. This series, like I said, these workshops are also going to be recorded and available here on the TAMIU ARC webpage. Here, it's tamu.edu/cs/ARC. We're ARC, Advancing Research and Curriculum Initiative, kind of a mishmash of different graduate support stuff, mostly dealing with STEM, but also supporting all the other graduate programs too. These workshops are they're recorded, and then they're usually put up in chunks either on our YouTube pages or on our social media or on just here on the professional development page. The next one after this, I'm just going to pre-promo it, is the March 21st machine learning workshop with our data analyst, or our data scientist, Jacinto de la Cruz. That should be good. But for now, we're going to talk about thesis. So let's look over at, and I bring this up because a lot of our previous workshops about thesis are also available here in our past recordings. So if you don't find everything that you need tonight, you may find it in one of these old recordings about thesis, especially about like arguments and stuff. Here's another one here. There's another one here. There's another one somewhere over here. There's usually one per semester. Okay, so all of this stuff that I'm going to be pulling from tonight is here under the Writing Consultant tab in the ARC website. There is another way to go to this. Sometimes I'll just Google search TAMIU ARC and then like writing, or TAMIU graduate writing, and it usually is the first Google result that pops up. Although I will say sometimes we get confused with the other department that has the A in front of it, the ACE, the Academic Center for Excellence. They're the tutoring center. They're not, they're a different department. Like we're all TAMIU, but they're another branch. All of this stuff that I'm pulling from here is going to be here under thesis. Just takes you right to the bottom of the page. These tabs in particular, and I've been meaning to record like a guide or something on just the stuff that we have here, but this is as good a time to look at them as any. These accordion tabs here have all the stuff that we've been developing and making for thesis and dissertation students for the last 5 years. The stuff here on the first tab, right where most people will be looking at it, like right from scrolling down. This is official stuff. This is stuff that was put out by TAMIU and that either I tweaked or worked on, or that has been developed like with conjunction with other departments. So if you have questions about something specific and official and you're like, I don't know whether I can trust this dude's word for it, or my professor said this, but I don't really know. They seem kind of confused about it. These are the official documents. There are, I think, 7, but not all of them are going to be relevant to every student's, every person's situation is a little bit different. The manual, the policy manual specifically, and the formatting manual used to be 1 document. Now they are 2 documents. Mostly the policy manual is stuff that like is boring to know, but that like people want you to know about like rules and publication and forming your committee and deadlines and stuff like that. It's dull stuff, but it is, it keeps the lights on. It keeps things in order for people who have never done this before, like for professors who have never done it before, mostly, to be honest with you. Copyright availability forms, like all of that is available in the policy manual, but I split it up like this because most people don't need this information. So mostly what they're going to need is, instead of the formatting manual, this is where most of the explanations are. This is where most of the examples for stuff are. This is where a lot of the like, what shape should your document look like kind of takes form. A lot of this is still pretty dry. It's still not going to be like, how do I write my thesis? Like, how do I actually start like producing writing for it? A lot of this is still like, what should the title page look like, and what references should I use, and formatting, yeah. How what my page number is and stuff. That's all like relevant, like stuff you need to know, but it's not gonna like write your document for you. But it's still good to know. Like most of the time when I hear people and they're like, I have a question about something, like my references or something, that information is almost always in the formatting manual. So that's good. Like you can always find it there. These documents, most of the time, the request for service on a graduate committee, most people already have this from their chair, and they've already filled it out by the time they meet me. This is like before you ever start being a thesis student, but it's there. Like the official document is there. The proposal cover sheet is I don't even remember if we use this anymore. Oh no, we do. This is another like formal document that people use at the end. This one and this is the one that comes at the end of thesis 1. So if you, or when you finish thesis 1, you're gonna need your committee to sign this form, and they all say, this person did the requirements for our presentation. Yeah, you already have it. And they'll print a physical version usually, and then they'll just like submit this to the graduate school or the College of Arts and Sciences. So it's there also in case like you can't find it. These 2 forms are sort of the same thing, but they are for the end of thesis 2 or dissertation as it is. So these ones are about, it's basically exactly the same, except instead of being the proposal, it's the final version. And then the last one is the copyright and availability form, which is just a document that tells the library who is in charge of like our TAMIU library whether or not to publish the manuscript right away or to wait. Sometimes people have a holding period on their manuscript because they're trying to make it into something else, like an article or a book or something, or maybe they just don't want people to see it for some reason or another. They want to wait until like a certain time has passed. You can submit this form as many times as you want and continuously put off publication, or you could just submit it and have it go into publication right away. And usually it's not right away, to be honest with you. Usually the library has a bit of a backlog on manuscripts, so it might take anywhere from 3 weeks to a couple of months. It just depends on what their load is like.
Will my committee chair be helping me out with that, the availability?
Most of the time, your chair will just fill it out for you, unless you have some desperate reason not to. And usually they're aware of it at that point. I had a student a few semesters back who was publishing part of like one of the chapters of their thesis as a journal article, but it was like sensitive information or like information that was like secretive for some reason. So their chair already knew that, so they filled it out with them. Usually, most of the time, the chair does that sort of thing, but not always. Right? Sometimes I don't know. These rest of these are stuff that we developed for thesis students, except for this one. The thesis guides are ones that I put together for y'all after my experience being a thesis student. I need to update some of them, but most of the time, if you're having a question or you're having a problem visualizing some element of the manuscript because like you've never done it before and you don't know what it's supposed to look like, a lot of times that information is here somewhere. The template itself, I see a lot more people use lately. This is just a blank version of your thesis. Okay. All right. It's a blank version of your thesis. Sometimes I see people take this and like fill it in and put their own stuff in these pages. That's fine. You know, I would encourage you to do that if you just don't know where to start. Not always is this useful for people. Sometimes they're like, I need to have less space than this. I need to like actually put words on the page, which I get too. So, but sometimes people like this. They like this blank document of what's going to go here, for example. And then they start copying and pasting it right on the thing. Not for everybody. Sometimes people don't like this sort of thing. They're like, I'll do it myself. That's fine. That's fair enough. The formatting guides that I split up into 3 parts here. This one is mostly about formatting. Oh, they're all about formatting. This one's mostly about like required pages or pages that are necessary for every thesis. So if they have an asterisk here, they are optional. And if they have 2 asterisks like this, they are optional, but they're usually required. And you can see from this table of contents here, there's actually a lot of pages that are not optional, like a lot more than you would think. A lot of this is preliminary material, such as the stuff that goes before your chapter 1. So it's like title page, approval page, abstract, table of contents, and usually either the list of tables and list of figures. If you're working with a lot of images, or if you're working with charts of graphs, or you're working with tables and data, most of the time, most people they'll have one of those 2, or both. But those other ones, the title page, the abstract, or the title page, the approval page, the abstract, and the table of contents are always required, no matter what you do. And then the other thing that's always required, actually here, there should be another one that is missing that I think is a little bit, I think it was a little, oh no, there it is. The body of the text and all of its chapters or sections are also required. There has to be at least 42 pages of document in the final version of your thesis too. Proposals are always at least minimum 10 pages of document. I have never seen a student not meet that requirement. I think they must have put that requirement in a long time before I got here, but pretty much everybody will meet 10 pages of proposal at 42 pages of document just by trying. I did have a situation a couple of years back where a student didn't include a bibliography. They had no references, they had no works cited, and their rationale for this was that their journal model, which we don't really use anymore, it was a document that we used to help students guide their references. Their journal model didn't use any references, so they didn't either. So now it's a requirement that all manuscripts need references, citations of some sort. How they do that is up to them, but there needs to be at least some sort of citation, some sort of credit giving thing. And then the last required page is the vita, which is always the last page of the document. And there's different ways to look at the vita. I'm going to skip straight to that one because the rest of these are ones that I think most people can understand. I have some tips about page numbering and about spacing here that are useful for formatting, but a lot of the times people tend to do that stuff on their own. It's the vita that I see missing a lot of the time. There's two different ways to do this. Vita can be either in this list style or in this narrative text style. All it does is it needs to have the student's name, the same spelling and way that it appears in the rest of their manuscript. It needs to have their background information or educational background. It needs to have other relevant career information. If they don't have it, then they can just skip it. And they need to have, it needs to be the last page. And that's it. So it's got very few requirements actually, but I think that's why it gets overlooked. Also because people are like, which one should I do? And I've seen people try to do both actually. So as long as it's confined to one page, you're fine. Sometimes people add optional stuff. These are actually my vita. Sometimes people add optional stuff like an email address or contact information for the author or a permanent mailing address, but you don't have to include that stuff. It's not required. So that's the formatting guide 1. The guide 2, this one is specifically about style and about the journal model. So actually this one needs to be updated because we no longer require the journal model. It's now optional. It used to be, and you see this in the slide here, it used to be that this journal model was something that every manuscript required. People needed to have a document from the last 5 years, which told us how the student was going to base their in-text citations and their references. And you needed to have this particular document of your choosing from your any publication from your discipline, so like history or biology or something like that. And it had to be published in the last 5 years, and it would dictate your in-text citations, bibliography, and the labeling for tables and figures. This isn't required anymore because now students are also allowed to use the common citation styles of APA, MLA, and Chicago styles. And because of that, it makes things a bit simpler because most people know at least one of those 3 styles, and they'll usually choose to use one of those styles. Whereas a journal sometimes will be very close. There'll be a close approximation of one of those styles. MLA is really common, but it's usually like close to MLA or something like MLA. So it's not exactly like the reason we did away with it is because people were coming to us and being like, can I just use APA, or I've already done all of my citations in Chicago. Please don't make me change it. So now it's not required, but it is optional. Some people liked it, so we left it in. And then when the rules of the journal model or the citation style don't agree with the formatting manual always trumps that. And so looking at that, again, formatting manual, the one that we saw in the official documents, everything goes back to that one. Whether or not you include it, you have to have on your first page this little line of text that says the manuscript follows the model of whatever it is. APA 7, MLA 9, Chicago 17, whatever it is. This isn't required for proposals, but it is required for all final documents, for all final manuscripts. This is about spacing. I'll let people look at this on their own. It's usually not that interesting. This one's about block quotes, which are a little bit different in the final version of your manuscript. For whatever reason, TAMIU styles block quotes and insert quotes are like spaced a little different than standard, but that usually isn't a concern until like the very end. Subheadings can't go on the bottom of a page like this by themselves. They have to be pushed to the next page if you see them like that. This is also pretty common, and I see people kind of getting messed up with this a lot of the time at the end, where they're like, what do you mean I have to push it down? It's going to throw off my whole table of contents. Yeah, it becomes kind of a mess. But usually it's not too big of an issue if people know about it ahead of time. I want to point out also, this isn't really like required stuff for the proposal. Like most of the time, the proposal is pretty informal. We don't actually search for any of these things. It's not until we get to the end of thesis 2 that we're like, it's not like this, and so therefore it gets bounced back. With proposals, pretty much like you turned in 10 pages, you're good. You're good to go.
Because I know some people have done, one of my friends did his proposal, like he had to do something like tables, and another one had to submit like pictures. Yes.
Yeah, the only time I think it gets bounced back is if it's like, it says you have a table here, but there isn't one. So where is it? But most of the time it's like, oh, well, your picture's like floating off to the side. It doesn't matter. If your committee approved it, then that's good enough for me. Bibliography, pretty much this just says that there has to be one. That's pretty much it. If desired, you have a separate subdivision, yeah, etc. Other tips and tricks for editing. This is just like in general editing tips. Helpful, but that's not going to help you write your paper most of the time. The guide for 3 is just tables and figures. And this is a very short guide. Sometimes people get tripped up because they'll have a table with data, like numbers like this, that continues on from one page to the next. If it does that, you have to have this continuation break, or this break between the two tables, that has a bit of text that says table 1 and then table 1 continued. You do see this sometimes as an issue, but usually again at the end. And I do see having to correct this as an issue, especially when like people have a lot of tables. I had a student a couple semesters ago who had 130 tables, and a lot of them did this. So there was a lot of going in and adjusting and putting the break. Very, very not fun for either of us. So if you do plan on having a bunch of tables, maybe think about this ahead of time. But other than that, you're probably fine.
Couldn't I also say, for instance, dedicate like a whole section to just tables and just have them all there and just say, oh, for further reading, see table 1 on this page?
You could do that. You could have an appendix with all your tables at the end, or you could also push your table to the next page and just have it be sitting there. Like let's say, break it here and push all of that to the next page. Have a dedicated page for your table. The only problem with that is if you have tables in the narrative of your text in the body of your paper, they need to appear within, I think, 2 pages of the actual thing. So if you have, or of wherever you've mentioned them. So if, like, let's say this paragraph says right at the bottom, see table 1, all of this says this is sample text. Like, it doesn't say anything important. But if it said right here, see table 1, then the next page would have to be the table or the previous page. But you could do what you said and put it all in an appendix. That would be fine too. But a lot of people don't think about that ahead of time because they're like, why would I? And that's it for that one. These are the ones that actually I wanted to, this is the reason I wanted to do this presentation night. But I think I just want to look at them very briefly. The table of contents guide. This is about making, like, auto-generating a table of contents. This is not for everybody. Some people don't like this. They only have 4 chapters or something, or they don't like the way that this ends up looking. That's fine. So this is mostly for people who are going to have like tons of subheadings and they want an easy way to keep track of it. That's a good guide for that, but it's also like there are other ways to do this. This one on presentations, I'll talk about in a second. And this one, the format checklist and the editing checklist. Neither of these are official documents, although there was an idea at one point to make both of them official. But now they're just useful. They're just for utility. They have like signature areas, but they're not required. This one is about like general formatting stuff for like pages, PDFs, Word, like setting your margins and having all of those required pages and all of that stuff. It's all the same information that you would find in the formatting manual and in Thesis Guide 1, but I've made it into a list because for some people that was easier to keep track of. Also, it looks nice and clean this way. So for some people, this is a lot more convenient. They have a better time understanding this. It's very straightforward. It goes from start to finish. It goes from biggest to smallest. It's a good way to keep track of the information that's available here. Here it has information that I need to update, actually, but this does go to my email address. So if you do end up looking at this and going, I think that this is wrong, you could always email me and fight me on about it. That'd be fine. This one is the same thing, but it's instead of being a list, like a list from top to bottom of like, did you include the page number on the top left, top right margin? Do you have your beta? It's the same thing, except now it's a checklist that you can use to look at with a person who could be on your committee. And that way your committee knows exactly what you're submitting when you submit it. Again, this is not required, but I do find that it might be useful for some people because sometimes I have committee members come to me and be like, I didn't know what my students submitted. They usually do. They usually are very on top of it. But if they don't know, or if they're like, what did you do? What did you change? This is a good way to keep track of that and go, okay, I need this, I need this, I need this, or I want this. Chapter sections, margin spacing. Again, these are all formatting things, so none of this is about actually writing. Here's a calendar. This one is old. I need to update it too. Here is the presentation guide. I'll talk about this one right at the end. And the other one, I want to talk about these really quickly. So these ones, Thesis 1 handouts and Thesis 2 handouts, they're very similar to each other. They're full of activities and little prompts and ways to organize the manuscript that I put together a couple of years back and try to keep updated with new stuff, but some of it might be a little out of date right now. The 5398 ones are for Thesis 1. These ones in particular, the brainstorming and goal setting, source examination, and model manuscripts, and reading unfamiliar text and annotated bibliographies, a lot of that is skill that you've probably already picked up ahead of going into thesis, but not always. Sometimes I encounter people who are not like writing, like in writing intensive majors, let's say math majors, or sometimes people who have never done research before. They might need a little bit more guidance. They might need a little bit more direction. And so that's who these guides are for. I don't want to go through all of them, but I do want to look particularly at the literature review and the defense, and also the prospectus. So prospectus is interesting because it's not required. There is no thesis prospectus at TAMIU. Some like professors assign something very similar. You may have heard the word prospectus. And if you go to other institutions or you go on to do dissertation, a lot of times they have what's called a prospectus. It's mostly just a fancy proposal, like very formal. Our proposal at TAMIU is a lot less formal. It's a lot of like, this is what it should look like. This is like the minimum. And it's not until thesis 2, the final dissertation or the final manuscript of thesis, that things become more complicated or more formal. So instead, I made this prospectus, this idea prospectus based on other people's like submitted work. And I use it as a kind of, what's what I'm looking for? It's like a template. It's like a mini guide. Because it's not required, a lot of the times people will end up skipping it and going towards something else. And I think that makes sense. But I have this in place for people who like absolutely have no idea where to start. And so this asks you to generate things like background information about your topic. If you want to rate, it's a lot of like the things you might see in the brainstorming, goal setting, source tracking, and reading unfamiliar text. It's kind of all these things put together into one convenient document so that if you have nowhere to start or no guidance from your committee, then you can start with the prospectus. Who is your topic about? Where are you getting information from? What sorts of things interest you about the topic? What gaps in the subject area are there? What research have you already conducted? What are the experts saying? What is it that bothers you about the topic? What can you still explore? And then it also tells you like, go to this other activity. This one here, the literature review is, I think it's exactly the same as the one over here. So you could just pick one. But in particular, this literature review is a little shorter. It's showing you things like how to find the most important sources, what are called watershed texts that everybody needs to read to know about the topic, or things that you need to have read to prove that you know about the topic. Recent literature, sorry. Things that have been published about the topic in the last 5 to 10 years. Recent is kind of difficult to pin down, especially depending on what your discipline is. For some people, recent is like things published last year, and other people, recent is like things from the last 20 years. So I tend to say 5 to 10 years is recent, and anything beyond that, you probably want to talk to your chair. Intersecting work, stuff that's not quite from your field. Say if I'm doing a project on history, I might not need stuff about education, but they might align somewhere. Or if I'm writing something about biology, I may not need something about psychology, but there might be an interesting intersection. Controversial dissenting opinions, things that are maybe outside, or maybe things that are challenged or may feel like you're challenging, things that you want to disagree with, that's fine too. And then related works or things from fields that are just completely not in your direction at all, but maybe they point towards some trend or some activity that you find interesting for your field. So most of the time people are going to pull literature for their literature review from these 2 blocks, and then a little bit less from these 3 blocks on the bottom. I tend to think of literature review as like a pyramid, where you are building a foundation of texts that you need your committee to see that you've read. And typically this will either be part of your introduction chapter or be part of your chapter 2, depending on how this is set up. Not everybody writes a straight up literature review. Sometimes people don't. And that's normal as well. But a lot of times literature reviews can be an informal part of your writing as well, typically appearing near the beginning of your work and sometimes being between half a page and 30 pages. This depends on what your topic is and who your committee is and what they want you to do too. Then it's got like, once you've found what you want to do, or you have an idea of where to start looking or where to start thinking about these things, this activity is for organizing your research. Then they've got research questions, which is an activity of how to take sources that you've looked at and thread them into a question that you can use to guide your writing. Research questions interesting because in a lot of ways, master level work is all about questions and not so much about answers. We look for answers in things, like we can maybe provide some answers if I'm saying, what is the role of education in writing and vice versa? But a lot of times I answer that question with more questions. This person says this, so maybe it's that. What do we know about writing in the last 5 years? What do we know about education in the last 5 years? So questions become more relevant sometimes in our fields rather than answers. So research question, having at least one singular research question that's going to drive your work of what is important about this, or how does knowing about this affect the way we think about this other thing? Sometimes you just need to summarize and report on that information, and that's fine. But I think having the ability to think critically or to generate a research question is at least going to guide you in that direction too. And then here's organizing your manuscript itself. This one is not about the sources, but about what I mostly see when I see people doing this sort of manuscript work. In science fields, they also, I just learned this the other day, that they have a term for this. In science fields, they do, it's an acronym, which is, I think, LMAC. It's literature review methods, or LMRAD. I don't remember.
Science.
Yeah, I don't remember, and neither am I. My background is in English, so I think it's literature, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, something like that. And it's usually the same. It doesn't really change that much. So there's not really an equivalent for humanities. But if there was one, I think it would look a lot like this, where we have an introduction, a literature review, some sort of roadmap, like for yourself to tell you like which way am I going to go, and then usually a conclusion. Usually at this point, like this is where things start to branch off and you start doing like chapters after the literature review. But this is a nice way to organize that information right at the beginning. You could actually take these documents, these Google Docs that I have here, and you can download them or fill them out or make a copy for yourself. You go to File and then make a copy. And then from there, you could just fill this out however you want. That's a good starting place for a lot of people. This literature review is the same. And this one, the proposal, this information about public speaking and defense, I have this information here as a list or as like a little sheet. This one is about like the policy and the formal stuff that has to do with proposal. Like if it really like is weighing on your mind, you're like, I'm scared of it, which I think a lot of people are. I think that's normal. That's normal to be nervous. This sort of demystifies that. It's just a way to say, okay, what is this? You know, like I've never done this. In a lot of ways, proposal is just a fancy presentation. If you ever presented at a conference, it's very similar to that. If you've never done that, it's very similar just to a in-class presentation, especially the proposal one. For the defense, it's a little bit more serious than that, but I'll be honest, not that much more. Committees hear you out. They usually wait until you're done to ask questions. They usually will vote. They'll kick you out of the room and then they'll vote. And then they'll either pass you or fail you. If they pass you from a majority vote. If they don't pass you, then you have to do it again. It's very, very, very rare that I see people fail. The only times that people fail their committee votes is when they absolutely just have not been talking to their committee at all. Like their committee will come up to them and be like, I didn't know you were still a student here. That's bad. So you always want to make sure that your committee at least knows you're alive and that they know what you're doing. Typically, you send them your stuff about a week with a week time for them to read it. and then another week to respond. So it's about 2 weeks anytime you want a response from your committee. So it can be as simple as I'm working on this thing, I'm still alive, to as complex as I'm working on this chapter and I don't understand how to finish this end sentence. You always want to give them about a week to do that. And then you also want to give them about 2 weeks to set your proposal date. In your case, since you're working on proposal for thesis 1, your end of your required deadline is, I want to say, the first week of May. I have the date. Graduate school. The date is always here. They always update it. It's always so much more updated than mine. Is May 1st. These ones, these formatting revisions for the thesis and dissertation, these are a little bit, oh no, sorry, it's April 26th. But that's like just a couple days before. This one is for people submitting thesis 2. This one is for getting your
Presentation.
Well, actually, this is the presentation date. This one is the manuscript date. This is like getting it to me and having me do all of the, you're missing the beta, you're missing the table of contents stuff. This one is the presentation date. This one's also a presentation date. So make sure you remember that.
Yeah.
Just send it to your committee. Probably, I would say you want to be at least ready to send it to them by April 1st. But if you can't do it right at that day, maybe you get a few more days. I've seen people do it all the way up to the same week, but it starts to become very stressful for you and for them. That's not necessarily good.
Because they have exams.
Yep. What else? How do I decide on a date? They usually decide for you. All this information is there too. How long do I have? What do I do if I pass? What do I do if it's not approved? What should I do? These ones are questions for your committee, or questions that your committee might ask you. It's not an exhaustive list. That's ones that I've seen that are very common. I personally don't go to defenses unless I'm invited. Because people don't always want you there. They're like, no, I don't want anybody to see it. And I get that. But these are the questions I've seen that people have asked in these sorts of committees or in proposals and defenses. Sometimes they're more technical. Who was the Queen of Hawaii during this time? That sort of thing. But sometimes they're less. A lot of times they're more broad. And so it's like, why did you use this theory? Why did you look at this strategy? Why did you look at this source? What is the scope of this? What is your design for your experiment if you're doing experimental design? Explain blank term or blank detail. Why did you choose this setting? What mistakes did you make? I saw that one once. That was brutal. What mistakes did you make in this particular thing? Oh, not fun. What limitations did you encounter? What would you do now that you've completed it? And what advice do you have for other research in the future using your research? So these are pretty common, like what will you do now sort of things. Usually, and oh, the reason that I was saying I rarely see people fail is because usually they won't let you go to proposal, they won't let you go to committee until you're ready. Because they don't want to have your time wasted either. So it's very rare to send people to committee without them being ready. Most of the time you are ready. Whether that takes another semester or 2 semesters, that's up to you and the chair, but ultimately it's the proposal, it's the committee that will pass you or fail you. It really has less to do with even from your own writing, it has to do with that. The other thing that's here is these tips. That document is the same as this one here. There's like a little link that's here. This one is all just public speaking and setup and preparation and what should I do on the day of and how should I talk during the thing and what questions should I ask or should I expect and what do I do after and what do I do if I'm not a good speaker and what should I do to prepare for that. So this is all pretty general stuff, but a lot of times people they overcomplicate it. In my experience, people tend to make it more complicated than it has to. I know I do this. I know I have a tendency to do this. I know that when I was a graduate student working on my thesis, I had a tendency to do this. What if I'm not doing it right? What if I'm completely going the wrong direction? What if they say they like it, but in the day of they completely throw me a curveball and they fail me at the last second? Most of the time that doesn't happen. They want you to pass, things go well, treat it like a large paper, and you'll be okay most of the time. And for every other question, for everything else, you can always contact me. My information is here on the writing consultant page. If you need to email me, you can do that at writingconsultant@tamiu.edu. And my phone number is there too. It's usually easier to get a hold of me via email. But you can also set up time to talk to me too. I have like hours. And that's it for this presentation. So now I'm going to stop recording. Hopefully they'll get something good out of that.